asked what are my 3 top choices for my for where I'm going to be and what committees I'll be on. The absolute number 1 is the Armed Services Committee. We have to have somebody who's in the Armed Services Committee that wore the uniform. And right now there is less representation in Congress at the federal level and of course the executive level than ever before, where we just do not have people that recognize the impact of the military. And this last budget, for example, that Warner voted for, was stripping away a lot of the things that came from the that came out of or came on the backs of our veterans. So we have to be there. One of the other areas, and I don't know the exact name of the committee, but I've got a master's degree in finance.
I apologize, but this is not going to happen in now.
Sure. I definitely want to be on one of the finance committees because we really need to make sure that we've got people who understand the budget cycle, we've got people who understand the finances, and they do. And the third that I want to be on is I truly want to be on either a domestic violence one or one that deals with deals with those that are less that have a less advantage in our in our country. And I think truly that if we all did what we could do when we could do it, okay? If we all did what we could do when we could do it, we don't need the federal government at all in our lives. Because we're doing it. So if we did, what we could when we could, we would be a much better place, helping our neighbors out, helping each other out, volunteering at a fire station like this.
Okay, so I'm sorry, but that was actually part A. Part B now says, okay, given those committees, how do you see confirmation hearings for various presidential appointees? How would you go about that?
Yeah, this is one that comes up a lot. We need to talk about this. The Senate, as you know, has the advise and consent role for all appointees from the president. I will advise and I will not consent. I mean, we have to do a significantly better job of the advise and consent. And it was 2 weeks ago that we had just this cop killer and somebody that was coming through, and they wanted him, Obama wanted him inside of this, to be confirmed. And of course, Warner voted for this, and it failed, which is excellent. That typically does not happen. So something strategically went wrong when Harry Reid, which is good. But what we have to do, and I'm most concerned about the Supreme Court justices. Very, very concerned about that. Because we're getting decisions that come down right now at 5-4. What happens when they come down 4-5? I mean, this is a masterfully different world if they come down 4-5. So we know that Ginsburg is getting old, although she'll never die. We know that Kennedy is getting old as well, and others. So I'm very concerned about the advise and consent law. And we'll take that very seriously. It's not a rubber stamp. We have to actually go through and make sure that these people are qualified, because they're making decisions and they're impacting lives. So, and the only way to get the power correctly is to have the right people in the right places. Yes, sir.
I'm really concerned about the president and his pen in Congress and Senate of the United States not to go back. And I'm not sure you have any plan yet, but
yeah, all solutions, I believe, at the federal level flow through the Constitution. So all we have to do is quite simply hold the Constitution up and say, well, Mr. President, where does it say you have the authority? Where do you have this authority? Okay? And the answer is he doesn't have the authority. So right now, there's been 2 articles of impeachment brought to the House. Are you all aware of that? Okay. So articles of impeachment have been brought to the House, which starts in the House, and then it goes from the House into the Senate. So a question that I'll twist your question around just a little bit. High crimes and misdemeanors is not a high threshold. Even the phrase high crimes. So if you pull that out and just say crimes and misdemeanors, if the President of the United States was a CEO of a company, he'd be in jail for fraud. And the threshold, I'm sorry?
So would our whole court.
So the threshold for high crimes and misdemeanors is lower than fraud. So if it passed, as we all remember, you have to have articles of impeachment are in the House. And then once the president is impeached in the House, it goes to the Senate, where the Senate determines guilt or innocence. I don't know if it's guilt or innocence.
Well, they try him.
They try him, and he's either guilty, I don't know if he's guilty or innocent, or guilty or not guilty. Two different things.
Yeah, I think
Under
so.
everything I know, I'm voting to convict. And ask Ed Gillespie the same question, and he won't answer that question.
Is it Jay Sefalo, isn't he working on that?
I know that there's a couple of people that are working on that, and I don't know exactly who. But the good news is they've been introduced. Because, I mean, let's start with Fast and Furious. Let's go to Benghazi. Let's go to the NSA spying. Let's go to the IRS. And all of these things trace back. And, well, they all trace back. And he should be held accountable. Yes, sir.
What does the Federal Communications Division do? And why do we have one? Just recently they're talking about putting people inside of Fox News and other places like that. And there's a lot of adverse publicity with that. But how big is our budget and why do we even need it?
You've asked a good question, and I don't know the details to that. But the reason we need them, this is the reason you need them, but you don't need them in the scale that they are now. Because, remember, the federal government's designed to provide for the common defense, settle disputes between states. Because the airway will cross a state line, it falls under a jurisdiction of the federal government. Okay? But not to the magnitude that it has now. And we need to peel back these many agencies. So one of the things that I want to do, one of my plans is this. Every major legislation that goes through, think Patriot Act, for example, or think Obamacare, guys. Every major legislation that goes through and is signed into law, we automatically sunset. Okay? Maybe we automatically sunset it 7 years. I mean, I haven't thought through the timetable on this, but not 10, but something shorter than something shorter. And why do we need this? Because we get saddled by knee-jerk reactions. The Congress feels like it has to think Sandy, like, oh my God, we got to do something. And then once it's on the books, it sits on the books forever. And they never sunset. So why don't we sunset this? Why don't we have Obamacare if it was truly a medical delivery event, which it's not? The only way to handle Obamacare is repeal it. You cannot fix Obamacare around the edges because it's a socialist program. But if it was, then why don't we put a sunset provision on it? So 6, 7 years later, we've got a new Congress, a new executive. They can decide which of the 3 or 4 provisions working, and which of the 8 or 9 or 100 are not working, and then let them vote to continue what's going on and hold them accountable in the future. Let me tell you why I say that. One of the tenets we're focusing on is education. Okay? We want to focus hard on education because we're losing education to liberal institutions that are literally brainwashing our children. And think Common Core. I mean, Common Core, thank God we don't have it yet here, but it's under McCullough. He wants it. Okay? But if we took a look at the education system down in New Orleans, I alluded to that a second ago, it literally took a hurricane to fix the education system in New Orleans. And if you're not familiar with what's going on, it's very easy to explain. Mom and Dad get a voucher. I like to think of it as a coupon because Mom and Dad never really spend a voucher, but they can spend a coupon. And they can take a child and put child into school A in the morning, move that child to school B in the afternoon. They can do an online class and do dual enrollment if they want, get a college credit. So what's happening? The price per student is going down because we're now introducing, education and choice, and excellence. Price per student is going down, and the output is going up. Well, what's the output when you're dealing with a child in education? How smart they are, their test scores. So, and our future. And who in the world could be against that?
The Democrats.
How about Eric Holder? Eric Holder. And you know what? Eric Holder is filing a federal lawsuit, has filed civil rights law. Hence the, let's sunset these guys. And what is it, what's the parameters of this? Because of the civil rights, we had to have desegregation, and because of desegregation, you had to have a certain percentage of students in each of the schools, right? Well, because mom gets to decide to move child from school A to school B, it's throwing off the percentage by less than 1%. And he's filed a federal lawsuit against this. I mean, this is the mistakes that we're having. So one of the things I'd just like to share with you, and then I think we've crossed maybe the witching hour, but we'll be here for, I'll be here.
Really up to the audience and yourself.
Sure.
If you guys would like to continue on, we like to keep it close to 8:30, but if you would like to continue, it's your call.
And Robin, I'd like to go ahead and ask you if you would mind passing those out, if you would. But I tell you, we need to make sure that, why don't you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? That's okay. Jake has it down. So.
Yeah, I'm still learning.
Give him the other side of it. That's fine.
Well, listen, Will, I do have one question.
Please.
For the Affordable Care Act, my understanding, since it was passed by a slim margin or a simple majority in the Senate, it can be repealed by a simple majority in the Senate. Do you take that to be accurate, or is that viable? And my second quick question is, do you or do you not big ones, do you or do you not support term limits?
Okay, I do support term limits. I'll just answer that right away. But you know how you solve term limits? Okay, in my opinion, you solve term limits by repealing the 17th Amendment.
I was going to ask you about that.
Okay? If I was God for a day and I could do anything constitutionally, I would repeal the 17th. So for those that don't necessarily remember what the 17th is, it's this. It's when we took the states out of the decision-making process for the United States Senators and we moved it to direct election of the people. Okay? So our founding fathers knew that they were going to put a check and balance. They were going to have the executive and the legislature and the judicial, of which, when you look at the Constitution, the legislative branch inside the Constitution has this much writing, the executive branch has this much writing, and the judicial has this much writing. They are not three co-equal branches. They're not designed to be co-equal branches. In fact, one of the ways you can debunk it right away is say, if Justice Roberts wants to increase his pay, can he co-equally just increase his pay? No, he's got to go through the legislative branch. So they're not co-equal branches. In fact, the amount of time spent in the Constitution did not allow for that. But the Founding Fathers also knew not only should we have a check and balance at the federal level, but we need to have a check and balance from the state to the federal level. And that was broken in 1917 when the 17th Amendment came, and it has been a disaster. Because now you have senators that want to bring the cookie jar home and unfunded mandates all day long.
The states are no longer represented.
And the states are not represented at the federal level. So that's why we need, and if we repeal that, we get term limits back. Now, the first question you asked is, was Obamacare passed with a simple majority? Actually, what happened with Obamacare, you all will remember this, it took 60 votes to pass it through the Senate in order to get past the cloture rules that the Senate had at the time. And then this thing happened, and Kennedy died, and Scott Brown was elected, and it threw off the balance. Remember this? And then they took the whole bill intact and moved it over to the House that voted for it intact. So it actually took 60 in order to get it through this. But whether they, and because it's a budget bill, the 60 votes does not count under Senate rules for the budget bill. It does count for the, or it did until Harry Reid changed the rules. But it doesn't count for a budget. It could be a simple majority. So if we vote to repeal in the Senate, we'd have to vote to repeal in the House. But then we'd have to have a signature by the President. Or at least a veto proof override. So that's what would happen. I will vote to repeal this monstrosity. No question about it.
Would you consider that to be a willing fight in this next election?
Yes. Oh, yes. Yes, yes. And for that matter, not to dig on Mr. Gillespie, But if we nominate Mr. Gillespie, so if we're halfway through here, if we nominate Mr. Gillespie, we take Obamacare off the table. It is absolutely off the table. Now, why would I say that? Go look at page 245 of this book. Because if you advocate for mandatory health insurance coverage for all emancipated adults, you take it off the table. Now, just as a side note, Mr. Washington's pretty slick. Okay? Whoops, I didn't mean to say Mr. Washington. Mr. Gillespie. Mr. Inside Washington's pretty slick. He will tell you, and he'll show you a video, that he said that Obamacare was terrible. It was absolutely a disaster. And that's true. He did say that. But he didn't say it about the theory. He said it about how Obama was going to put it to work in practice. So he was arguing the practice, not the theory. But he'll tell you all day long, he argued against it. And Mr. Cameron, he did argue against it. He did. But he argued against the practice and not the theory. Yes, ma'am.
I'm interested in knowing your feelings about using the Convention of the States to repeal 1617.15.
Okay. Do I agree with the Convention of the States, which, as you know, in Article 5 of our Constitution, our founders gave us two mechanisms to amend the Constitution. The first one we're all familiar with. There's been 27 amendments inside of the Constitution. Pardon me? Inside of Article 5, there's two ways. Inside of Article 5. And one of them that we're familiar with is the 27 amendments that we have. So 2/3 of the Congress have to pass out a proposed amendment, and then it goes to the states, and 3/4 of the states. The second mechanism is to bypass the Congress and to have it go directly to the states, where 2/3 of the states will push out an amendment or call for a constitutional convention. And then once the amendment comes out of the Convention of the States, is what it's colloquially called, then it has to go back to 3/4 of the states. So the process can either go from Congress or it could come from a convention called by the state, 2/3 of the states. It's interesting because I'm split on this, right? And I'll tell you why I'm split. There is a preponderance of evidence that our founding fathers put the Constitution together in a very genius way, and I think it was divine providence. I mean, on the edge of known society, back in 1776 and then 1789 when the Constitution was finally ratified, and the edge of known human society, these men came together and created this document. I don't think it happened by happenstance. So I default to their wisdom. And their wisdom is that Article 5 exists and that this is a mechanism to amend our Constitution. If for no other reason, because how in the world are we going to get term limits or the repeal of the 17th? Well, we can bypass those that are entrenched. On the other hand, I don't know if our founding fathers knew how vicious liberals were. They're absolutely vicious.